We are recording. So
okay.
Mary, you and I have done a conversation before. I don't know
Right.
if you want to, but it's been a while. You were one of the first.
It was
people
in
I talked to.
December. It was right. It was back in December. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. I think the third week of December. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so since then I had some health challenges and recuperated from that. I've been super busy in my garden and
Wonderful.
outside. I didn't because I was sick. I couldn't do my fall cleanup, so I had to do that in spring, which put me behind on everything. So I've been scrambling to get everything planted and now we're eating out of the garden and everything's going well. So I'm real happy with that. Yeah.
Good.
My grandson's coming over in a couple of days to help me put up a greenhouse, which I've been wanting forever. So I'm really excited about that. So
good.
Yeah, so things are going well. They're really going real well.
Good.
I had, I sent you an agenda and I had a whole list of things that I wanted to talk about. And then this morning I listened to your conversation with Cassidy, I think,
Cassidy,
about cults.
Yeah.
And I was like, people keep talking about this subject that I don't want to talk about, and now I'm going to have to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
Because I used to do a lot of talking about cults. I did a lot of public speaking about cults. I was on radio shows about cults and all this stuff, which I come by this honestly because I grew up a third generation Jehovah's Witness. So when I left from there, I asked a question that a lot of people who've been in a cult ask, which is, how did they manage to do this to me? So I did a real deep dive on the whole cult phenomenon and became pretty knowledgeable and able to talk about it with a wide range of audiences. And I also attended meetings of the International Cultic Studies Association, which I'll speak to you about that a little bit later on, but I even gave a couple presentations there. So it's a subject I'm pretty knowledgeable about. And I thought, well, if this conversation is going to keep going on your channel and people are going to keep bringing this topic up, I need to just step in here and say something about it from the standpoint of having that background. Not that I don't think that the things you said are terrific. I think they're very good. I have a little more, I can kind of expand on or dilate on them a little bit. And I think that you'll like that. But I'm going to start off with some cult humor. All right.
Okay.
So this is a guy that I knew a while back when I was doing a deep dive in this, and he was too. And we came up with this thing that was in a riff on Jeff Foxworthy. You might be a redneck if, and we did you might be in a cult if. So here you go. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. You might be in a cult if AK-47s are standard issue to the ushers.
Ooh.
You might be in a cult if you have an abiding horror of having the number 144,001 tattooed on your forehead. You might be in a cult if there's more than one way to skin a cat is a line from your liturgy. You might be in a cult if coffee, tea, Coke, they're all illegal, but Kool-Aid is okay.
Oh, ooh.
I know that one's wicked, isn't it? Okay, you might be in a cult if Armageddon factors very heavily in your retirement portfolio. You might be in a cult if all the books on your bookshelf are from one publisher.
Oh, I've got a lot from Erdman's.
I don't think that applies to you. That's more like a Watchtower Society, a little bit.
Yeah, I know.
So anyway, I thought that we could start with a little humor to get Paul Vanderklay's laugh going. My husband now, he has something he says to me, like when he saw on the calendar I had that I was having a conversation with you, he goes, "Oh, you mean a conversation?" Because he's always riffing on that Z that you put in that word.
Really?
You do that? Are you where you do that? You call it conversation.
How should I say it?
Oh, no, you should say it exactly the way you say it.
Well, how do you say it? How does your husband say it?
I say with an S.
Conversation?
Yeah.
Oh.
You tend to put a bit of a Z there. So
well, why do I do that?
I don't know. It's probably because where are you from?
Is it from New Jersey?
It might be. It might be. Who knows? I was born in New Jersey, but I left there when I was 3 to move to Miami.
New Jersey, not New Jersey.
I know, but I'm not correcting you. So I'm just pointing out that that's something my husband picked up on and likes to kind of joke around about.
People, the word people mock me for if I say orange. Instead of orange, I say orange. Maybe it's Michigan people that pick up on that, because I don't seem to have too much of a Jersey accent.
Oh, that doesn't sound strange to me. But, I grew up in Miami, and, everybody from Miami is from New York, New Jersey, Ohio, or Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
At least when I was growing up there. It was like there were no natives. Everybody was from up north. Yeah. So even though I grew up in Miami, which is way to the south, I didn't end up with a southern accent, although that did change after I spent 20 years in Georgia. So I probably sound like a southerner now, but I didn't when I moved here. Okay, so let's do some of the serious stuff on cults, okay? So I want to disambiguate a couple of things.
Okay.
All right. So this is for this, for the sake of people listening. All right. The first disambiguation is between the word cult and occult, because I find that sometimes people get a little bit confused between those two words. So occult means something that's hidden. And practices that are hidden, have been hidden, might be spiritual practices or other practices, usually refers to things like, seances or divination or some sort of thing like that. All right. And then the word cult, though, comes from a completely different root. And it's the same as like agriculture, cultivation, all of that. And you might wonder, okay, so how does it means a religious devotion? How does religious devotion tie into that? And it's because the origin of like the religious devotion had to do with agriculture, either, propitiating the gods so that you get a good harvest, or maybe in the sense of cultivation of something internally to the person, right? So that's how that's all tied in. So it means religious devotion. So that's the first disambiguation. Then after that, you have to distinguish between good cult, neutral cult, and bad cult. All right? So the good use of the word cult, and this is very ancient, goes back to things like in Christianity, we talk about things like the cult of the Virgin or the cult of the saints. It simply means devotion to that particular saint or devotion to the Virgin or something like that. All right? And that's a positive use of the word cult. Then there's like the neutral use, where you apply that sense of devotion to something that doesn't really have to do with religion, right? Like talk about a movie having a cult following, all right? Or somebody might say, the anthropologist went to visit that tribe in the Amazon and studied their cultic practices, which just means their religious practices, their rituals and things, okay? And then there's the bad use. There's the kind of like the term, when we're using it as a term of saying, okay, that group is a cult, and that group is probably one that you want to stay away from, or it's like a warning, okay? And I noticed you mentioned to Cassidy about the word sex. Well, just to make things more confusing.
S-E-C-T-S.
S-E-C-T-S, right. In Europe, the word that we use for cults, we call things cults here, they only use the word sex for that.
Really?
In Europe, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So because I think it's historically because the groups that were considered to be aberrant were also breakaway groups. So the word sect is related to the word section. It means a break, a group that's broken away.
Yeah. Sectarian.
Right.
It's not hard.
Yeah. So anyway, in Europe, because in the International Cultic Studies Association, such as international, we would get visitors from Europe, Japan, different places in the world, and that was one of the things that we had to be aware of, that they never use the word cult except in the good sense, like the religious sense or the neutral sense. But when they talked about groups that we would call cults, they would talk about them as sects.
That's interesting. Okay? I didn't know that.
So I thought I would go in a little bit into the kind of like the modern phenomenon. Like you talked about the United community and that. I mean, we can look back at different groups and say, well, they were cults. But there's kind of a modern phenomenon of cults that started around the early 1960s, and kind of came into public awareness, because before that, people were not really talking about cults. All right. So what started happening in the early 60s was this thing where, well, the baby boomers were, they were at the top of the population. It was that youth wave, right? And all of us, and also it was the first generation where you had a major part of the population going off to college, right? So you had these parents who had these kids right after World War II, and had, were very upwardly mobile and very interested in their education and their advancement and everything. Put a lot, probably the generation that got the most time, attention, and devotion of resources into them of any generation of kids ever, right? And now is sending their young person off to college with the ambition of becoming some, lawyer or doctor or something. And then suddenly these kids were, by kind of astounding numbers, suddenly disappearing from school. They might either just completely disappear and the parents have to go hunting for them, or the parents would get a note or a message from the child or a letter saying, I'm dropping out of school and I'm going off to India, or I'm going off to this particular place out in California, or I'm going up into the mountains of Idaho, and I'm following this guru or that religious thing or whatever. And that was just astounding to these parents. And when happens, one person and then another person, then another person, and it's kind of an isolated incident, people don't think much of it, but gradually it started becoming aware that this was happening to, a significant number of kids, college kids, and the parents started putting their heads together to figure out what in the world is going on. Who are these people who are taking our children, and when the parents would try to talk to them, it was like just a wall. I mean, I could not get through at all. So they felt like something had really happened to transform their children's personality very suddenly and very significantly, and that and all the plans, what happens to all the plans, the college, the future, the career, the whole works, it's all down the drain. So very upsetting and distressing, as you can imagine, with a parent with college kids, how you would feel if that happened with one of your kids, right?
Oh yeah.
So and this began to be written about in magazines, and newspapers would occasionally have articles about it and stuff. So this was alarming enough that some of the parents decided that they would go to the law about it. So they started going to the courts and saying, something bad has happened to my child. My child has, lost their mind. Somebody has taken control of their mind. This person is not acting like himself or herself, and they would get custody of them to put them into mental hospitals to have some sort of, intervention done on it.
Deprogramming.
Well, at that time, it wasn't even called deprogramming, because I really didn't know what they were dealing with at all. The deprogramming situation came a little bit later, as people started to get a handle on what could be done, how the communication could go. But this was just the initial thing of, trying to get mental health professionals involved. Well, it didn't take long for the cults to strike back with the courts and say, wait a minute, you're talking about adults here. You're talking about adults making a religious decision. What are you going to do next? Take somebody leaves the Methodist church and goes to the Baptist church, and you're going to put them in a mental hospital for it? So, the cults quickly won. So that avenue was closed in terms of trying to deal with the situation. So the second wave of response to this was the deprogramming. And the deprogramming initially actually happened with kidnapping. So the parents would hire somebody to go and kidnap their kid away from the cult group and take them to an isolated place. And by this time, there was enough kind of sense of how these personality transformations might have been accomplished, that there was some sense of how a person could be encountered and kind of snapped back. And in fact, this is the language they use, snapped back to reality. And you know, when I do talks on this, I go into more detail about that whole phase of it. But that didn't last very long. The reason it didn't last very long is very simple. It was an illegal thing. You know, you just can't go and do that. You know,
Kidnapping is against the law.
Yeah, it's against the law. Even if it's your parents, you know, that do it to you. So that phase did not last very long, and so there came to be another phase of this, which was more stepping back, looking at the phenomenon and looking at it academically, sociologically, and trying to figure out how to make a response to it. You know, that would be within the bounds of the law, that would respect the person, and yet could kind of get people out of this and get them back reconnected with their families. Because one of the hardest things about this was that in almost every case, they completely disconnected from their family, from their friends, from everything they had in their former existence. All right, which was very difficult on people, as you can imagine. So because this was kind of in the news so much and being talked about so much, there came to be, I would say, 3 definitions of cults that were kind of floating out there. Okay, so the first one was the popular one, and this was based on the sensationalism of the news stories and stuff. And in the popular mentality, it became an idea that cults were, number one, they were small groups. They dressed weird. All right. They tended to live in isolation, like live in a compound or something, and be, you know, fanatically devoted to the teachings of one leader. All right. And along with that, in the popular imagination, there was this idea that cults attracted stupid, weak-minded people. All right. Now, that combination of things is very dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is number one, that definition of a cult is inaccurate. And because it's inaccurate, you're not going to necessarily recognize when a cult is actually approaching you. You know, if you're looking for weirdly dressed people, you know, living in a compound, might be somebody else. And the other thing is that if you have it in your mind, and I've told this to many audiences when I've talked to them, if you have it in your mind that the people who get into cults are stupid, weak-minded people, that leaves you vulnerable, because of course you're not stupid and weak-minded, so you wouldn't possibly be attracted to get into a cult, you know. So that's that I think leaves people vulnerable to being recruited by cults, because they have in their mind that they're not the type of person who could get into a cult.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Now, at the same time, well, you're dealing with, you know, what was out kind of in the general population as they're thinking about what a cult is. There came to be a kind of a theological definition of a cult, and you touched on this a little bit, that there's a definition according to what they do, and another one according to how they what their teachings are, right? So the theological definition was promoted by Dr. Walter Martin. He wrote a book called Kingdom of the Cults back in, I think it was in the 60s. Was really, in the evangelical world, I think was the first kind of like big attempt to deal with this as a phenomenon. And based on his work, there was a group called Watchman Fellowship. Have you ever heard of Watchman Fellowship? Yeah. Okay, so Watchman Fellowship was started doing education, like counter cult ministry and education in churches and things like that, and they came up with a formula for defining a cult. Kind of a catchy little rubric. It's a add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Okay, so they would say, okay, a cult. And they were mainly, I would say, mainly dealing with aberrant Christian groups, but they could, you know, apply it outside of that. So a cult is a group that adds to the Bible, either subtracts from the deity of Christ or from the Trinity, multiplies what you need to do for salvation by a lot of different kinds of works, and divides the person from their family, their friends, and things like that. So that's pretty simple. People could remember it, and it has certain limited usefulness. But of course, you can see right away if you talk to a Catholic how how they could use that to say, oh, well, you Catholics, you add to the Bible either because they had the idea that because our Bible has 7 more books in it that we've added books to it, because of course Catholics draw their Old Testament from a different Jewish canon than what Protestants do, or because we have the magisterium and the magisterium and the Bible, we say tradition and scripture, and you're adding to the scripture. So it was kind of convenient for these evangelicals to be able to sort of lump the Catholics in with cults.
That's a really big old cult.
No kidding. Yeah, if your definition of cult includes most of the Christians on the planet, it's probably a little bit of a problem.
Well,
so,
you go back to that classical definition. This could get really ugly.
Yeah.
Wear funny clothes. Well, you got a guy on top of you.
Yeah, right.
This is getting all bad, Mary. What are you doing, Mary? You're making your case.
I know.
Worse.
Jumped from one cult into another. Okay. So then there, people started looking at it. A lot of people started looking at it from a more academic standpoint. So you had people dealing, psychologists, sociologists, academicians, people involved with the philosophy of religion, different things like that, ethics and whatnot, the legal, coming from the legal end, all that, looking at it. And they started, to put their heads together to come up with a definition. And you alluded to this, that it's based more on the actions than on the belief structure of the group. Or the shorthand for that is deed, not creed. Okay. So, of course, meanwhile, while all this is going on, the cults are saying that there's no such thing as a cult. Obviously, with all these definitions out there really isn't any such thing. Jehovah's Witnesses say this all the time. There really isn't any such thing as a cult because, everybody's got all these different definitions. So they could use that confusion to their own advantage. Well, from the academic standpoint, a more scientific look at it, of course, what you try and do in that case is see if you can locate some models, right? So the thought was, if we can find, what is this thing like? If it's like this other thing, maybe it's the same thing, or maybe it involves the same processes. So this, of course, is during the Cold War. So one of the things that's going on is you have these internment camps in communist countries, and you have these re-education camps where they would do what's called thought reform and put people in these camps and change them from being, having American values to being one of the communist comrades.
So would Jordan Peterson say the universities have become a cult?
Yeah, I guess he might say that. But this is the communists were actually doing this in the communist countries, and this was known. Robert J. Lifton, I think, is the psychologist that did a lot of study on this thought reform stuff. So some people said, well, thought reform, this that the communists are doing, the cults are just like this. They're exactly the same as this, except, of course, in all the ways in which they were completely different. And then, of course, another model that was invoked was the model of the abused woman, or, the person who identifies with the abuser. Sometimes they, Stockholm syndrome, they'll, have call that. Right? And so some people said, it's the same phenomenon as this, because it's exactly like this, except in all the ways that it's not, it's its own. So although those were useful models to understand some things, they were limited in their applicability because cult recruitment and cult involvement is its own thing. Okay, so the International Occultic Studies Association, which anyone can look up, and they have a lot of resources available on their website. It's run by Michael Langone, or started by Michael Langone. He might not still be there, I don't know, but it's been a long time since I had contact with them. But they drew together a lot of people from many different disciplines to interact with former cult members. And that was kind of the key thing in all of this, was to be able to bring in the people that had been through the experience, sit down with them and say, what was your experience like? How did you get in? What was it like while you were in? How did you get out? To begin to see a pattern. So I, as a former Jehovah's Witness, have sat in a room with 70 people who had been in all different kinds of cults, everything from UFO cults to science-based cults to health-based cults, political cults, various kinds of aberrant Christian groups, cults based on Eastern religions of various kinds, meditation, whatever. And just had everybody just tell their story, talk about their experience. And what really is stunning was how similar all of our experiences are. Even though everybody was in such divergent groups that you wouldn't think had anything in common. So that leads us to be able to say, okay, here are some characteristics that are in common with cults and how they operate. So let's start with the this idea that only stupid or weak-minded people get into cults. All right. As though somebody wakes up in the morning and says, my life isn't going too well. I know what I'll do. I'll join a cult. I'll make everything better. That's not how it works. Even though Nick may, he might have done that. Nick, is that the name of the guy that went into the different cults?
Yeah.
That's not the normal. That's not the normal pattern. Okay. Normally, people do not go looking for cults. Cults actively recruit people. And they do not actively recruit stupid or weak-minded people, because that's not what they want. They want people who are functional, highly functional. They want people who are capable, who have talent, who have skills, who have things that they can contribute to the group and make the group successful, and also who can themselves have the capacity to go out and recruit other people. All right. So cults are not. It's not like they're not going into the byways and looking for the.
Yeah, I got a lot of people that like to some cults here. There's a lot of folks around I could send them. I guess I don't want them.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the differences, right? And so the deception in recruiting is one of the key elements of getting people going into a cult. And when cults, if a cult knocks on the door, I'll say from Jehovah's Witness standpoint, it's not like the Jehovah's Witnesses, when you open the door, they say, hi, we are here to invite you to our cult down the street. So the way that cult recruitment works is, I call it hijacking. In fact, my big presentation that I do about cults, I've done as long as 4 hours at a time, is called Hijacked Lives. Because the point is that you have a person who's going through their life, and they have certain goals, interests, things that they're passionate about. And somebody comes alongside of them and says, hey, you're interested in this particular thing? Well, guess what? There's a whole group of people who are trying to do the same thing. Come and join us. And then when they get involved with the group takes them in a completely different direction. So when I was a Jehovah's Witness and I used to knock on doors, one of the things I would ask people is, what would make you happy? And people would say, and I really, honestly, I didn't care what would make them happy. I was just trying to get the inroad and to be able to get them into the group. Do you understand? It's like, it's like it wasn't really an interest in that person's actual happiness.
But I've never had a Jehovah's Witness ask me that question.
Well, that's because they probably aren't as good as I was.
See, maybe that's just it.
We do vary in our skill level, but anyway, that's the. They will talk to you though about being happy and having life on Earth forever, or stuff like that. They will make that kind of presentation. So they are trying to. They're trying to attract you with an offer for some kind of happiness. I mean, every cult is, right?
Well, churches do that too.
Yes, they do. But But the thing is that it's that individual and his development and his happiness that really matters to them, not using that person to further some different agenda.
I don't know. I've seen some churches do that too. I mean, that's part of this. I mean, it's churches sometimes act like cults, and usually not larger denominational. I mean,
right.
But churches can get kind of cultish, and
Well,
individual pastors can get cultish, and sometimes it seems like they start out as churches and they wind up as cults.
Well, and that's true. Okay, so I'm going to show you this book. Okay, this book is called Twisted Scriptures.
Okay.
It's by Mary Alice Chronologer, and the cover, if you look it up on Amazon, is different now. I want to spell her last name because it's like Hungarian or something, so it doesn't have enough vowels in it. CHRNALOGAR. All right. And that's what she talks about, is the way that some churches use the Bible in a manipulative manner. This is an excellent, excellent book for anybody who's interested. And I think Cassidy might be interested in reading this book.
Okay.
And I actually has helped with the editing of this book years and years and years ago. So, but I highly recommend this for, untwisting some of those little manipulative things that are used. Like when she talked about the gifts of the Spirit, trying to make them happen, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's some stuff in that book about that. The other aspect is then, as you mentioned when you're talking to Cassidy, so we have deception and recruiting, we have manipulative control over members, and that's a big part of it. And you mentioned that, manipulative control really is taking an illegitimate amount of authority over the life of a person.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that dawned on me, like when I left from the Jehovah's Witnesses, was, wait a minute, all these things they're telling me to do, they don't have any legitimate authority to tell me this. So that was kind of one of the things that was.
So you would consider Jehovah's Witnesses a cult?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They use a lot of manipulative control over people. So I'll give you one example. Like when people come and knocking on your door, Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your door, they have to report to their local congregation how many hours they spend every month talking to other people about their religion.
Yeah.
They have to report that. And you're kind of rated and ranked within there on how much time you actually spend doing that. That's a big part of their social rating and ranking. So, and there's a lot of other stuff. There's like, the discouragement of higher education and all of that. It is definitely a cult.
So because, I mean, to me, this is very, very interesting, partly because of the time in which it came up. I most often consider cults, usually there's a motive by the leader of the cult. It could be, it's often, like the Bhagwan out in, he had a very famous, you can find this story on Netflix. Usually it's financial.
The poisoning of the water and all that stuff, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that if you have Netflix and you haven't watched, I think it's called Wild Wild Country.
Yeah, I know about that story. Yeah,
fascinating, the Bhagwan. But usually there's a financial motivation. Look at Scientology. I don't have any problem calling Scientology a cult. Right. They obviously don't look for weak-minded people. They look for strong-minded people, and they dress well, and they use status, especially in terms of Hollywood and stardom. Tom Cruise, John Travolta, all of these. So, but it's very interesting to me that this, something happened during the baby boom era in terms of, I think there's affluence involved there. There's a whole number of things. And obviously a group like the Jehovah's Witnesses have been around far longer. Would you consider, here's another question, would you consider the Church of Latter-day Saints a cult?
Well, kind of leads to the difference between a cult and a world religion or a sect, right? So what I would say about the Latter-day Saints is that I think you're right when you call them a sect of Christianity. They're definitely aberrant in terms of theology. One of the things about a cult is that a cult cannot manage a civilization because cults restrict the areas of domains in which people can operate. And in order to have a civilization, you have to have all the area. You have to have somebody who's a cop, and somebody who's a soldier, and somebody who's a painter, and somebody who's a farmer, and somebody, you have to have all these different domains. And what you find in cults is that because they have so many restrictions on the individual, they have, you might have some. I'll use Jehovah's Witnesses again as an example. You'd be amazed at how many of them are janitors. All right, none of them are cops. None of them are soldiers. Almost none of them are doctors. All right.
Doctors, you have a real problem.
Yeah. So, so that's, almost none of them are scientists, so you don't have the full structure of a society that you can have. Now, okay, so let's look at Mormons. Could you say that you could have a civilization of Mormons? And I would say, yes, you can, because if they can have a whole state in the United States, that's bigger than some countries are. Yeah. And they have all the civilizational niches filled with people.
Yeah. Would you call the Amish a cult?
No, I would not call the Amish a cult, but I don't know that they punish people who leave. My understanding is that you're free to leave from the Amish. Yeah. All right. I would say that they're a very closed group. Yeah. But I would not call them a cult, because I don't think that they're engaging. For one thing, I don't think they're engaged in deception to try and get people to join. I don't think that they're engaged in. I think there's a tremendous amount of social pressure, but I don't think they're engaged in manipulative, unethical control of people within. And I don't think they punish people who leave. So those are some of the aspects that would make a group a cult.
Yeah, I agree with those aspects of the definition, and those come to me. I don't know. I mean, I'd always thought of the Jehovah's Witnesses more as a sect. Your point about restricting the domains in which people can operate, that's a very interesting point to me. And I'll have to think about that further.
So I think the more, so, Hilaire Belloc and Chesterton and those guys, they thought of Islam as a Christian heresy. Are you aware of that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say that Mormonism is a Christian heresy. I mean, theologically, it's certainly heretical. All right. So the question would be, is it on track to become another world religion like Islam? And I would say that kind of really depends on how they continue to relate or not to the wider Christian world. How integrated they become. And of course, that's real dicey, isn't it? Because how do we deal with them, and how do we deal with their theological aberrations? Yeah. But I would say that the more the lines of communication stay open with them, and the more that they're invited to, enter into theological dialogue with the traditional Christian faiths, the less likely it is that they're going to hive off and become a separate world religion. But and so I think it's definitely preferable from on many levels, from many standpoints, to keep them as being a heretical sect and not becoming like Islam and antagonistic to Christianity at large, world religion.
Because the Seventh-day Adventists have very much increasingly become sort of part of the evangelical fold, whereas the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Latter-day Saints, the Seventh-day Adventists, all of these came out of the burned over district in New York State towards the end of the 19th century, and a lot depends on sort of where they're moving, and we haven't seen any movement of the Jehovah's Witnesses towards any other group. They've, for the most part, remained in isolation and seem to want to remain there.
Right, right. And the thing with the Seventh-day Adventists is very interesting. You know that they came out of the Millerite movement, and
Right.
the Jehovah's Witnesses did too. So there's
Right.
kind of almost like two branches off of the same
Right.
tree that those two groups are. In
Right.
fact, the Seventh-day Adventists went through a brief period where they taught that Jesus Christ was really Michael the Archangel. And Jehovah's
Really?
Witnesses do teach that.
Yes, yes, that's right.
But the Seventh-day Adventists, repented of or changed that teaching, so they didn't maintain it. But it was during that time that the Jehovah's Witnesses broke off from them, and the Jehovah's Witnesses kept that teaching.
Yeah.
So we've got that, the tremendous ontological problem of Jesus being an angel, then becoming a man, then going back to heaven and becoming an angel again. So
right. Well, the LDS has demonstrated quite a capacity to change their doctrines midstream. I mean, they've changed on a number of things just in the last 50 years.
Right.
Richard Mao, who was a philosophy professor at Calvin College, he was president of Fuller Seminary, has had quite a bit of dialogue with the LDS Church. So it'll be interesting to see what becomes of them in the future. So,
right,
a big deal out west here, much more than where I grew up.
Yeah, yeah.
We've just got a few more minutes, Mary. So this is.
Well, thanks for letting me kind of lay that out. I hope
now Esther's going to complain because I let you colonize my channel and it didn't let her. He's going to be very upset by that.
I hope not. But I just want to, let me real quick share a few more resources with people who want to do a deeper dive into the subject. Now, I haven't really been active in this space for a number of years. So some of these books are a little bit older. They're all at least like 10 years old. But I showed you Twisted Scripture. I want to, this Releasing the Bonds by Stephen Hassan, Hassan, and he has another book that was prior to this, and he's real good at exit counseling. And this book would be valuable for people who have a family member who's in a cult. Dr. Paul R. Martin, now this is a Christian, and the book is called Cult Proofing Your Kids. And he comes from more of an evangelical background, but he is also the founder of Wellspring Retreat and Resource Center, which helps people recover from post-cult trauma in Ohio. It's a Christian-based, and he combines the psychological and the Christian orientation. All right. Margaret Thaler Singer was a professor at UC Berkeley. And this book is called Cults in Our Midst, The Hidden Menace in Our Everyday Lives. Interesting. I noticed you talked about the difference between a cult and a monastery. And she talks in here about that. And also she says, what's the difference between a cult and the United States Marines? So, but this is a great book, much more on the academic level study of the phenomenon. This one, Captive Hearts, Captive Minds. Captive Hearts, Captive Minds is a book that deals with survivors of cults, many different kinds of cults and their stories, that anyone who's been in a cult and wants to get something that really they can relate to on an emotional level, this would be really good. And then Recovery from Cults, edited by Michael Langone. This is again from International Cultic Studies Association resource, and more again an academic treatment, but comes at it from a number of different disciplines, from the legal, psychological, sociological, ethical, all that. So those are things, if people are, have an issue, they have a family member they think is in a cult, or they themselves have been in a cult and are walking around going, how did this happen to me? What was wrong with me? And what I want to say is, if someone has come out of a cult and they're walking around thinking, what was wrong with me, that they were able to do this to me, is I just want to say, there's nothing wrong with you. You were deceived.
Okay.
And that would be my bottom line statement.
Well, Nick signed up for another slot, so I'm sure he'll watch this or he and I talk. So another thing that I've been thinking about is getting a few people together for a conversation. And so we'll see, maybe we'll do this afternoon. I'm hoping to have one of those set up. So
Okay, good. Well, I look forward to seeing that, maybe participating in one of these days. And I'm going to leave a teaser. I'm talking to you again in 2 weeks, so I'm going to leave a teaser for everybody.
Oh my!
Okay? And so I had put it in the email to you. So here's the teaser. I have figured out what the female equivalent of C.S. Lewis's Men Without Chests is, and I'm going to talk about that next time we talk.
Okay, well, there's your teaser.
All
All right, Mary. It's great to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you too. Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.